what I've directed the CDC to do is that as soon as somebody is diagnosed with Ebola, we want a rapid response team, a SWAT team, essentially, from the CDC to be on the ground as quickly as possible, hopefully within 24 hours, so that they are taking the local hospital step by step through exactly what needs to be done.
A virus becomes contagious when the temperature, acidity, and genetic and protein environments are favorable. To colonize a different host, the virus must adapt itself to the new conditions by mutating. What scientists fear most is that a virus of animal origin, such as the avian flu virus, and a virus of human origin infect the same cell. Their genetic material would then combine to produce thousands of hybrid viruses.
Now, there may be even more resistance to this idea that viruses are a complete fabrication, even more so than the flat Earth. If you say the flat Earth, people might just think you're crazy. But if you say, I don't even think viruses exist, they may think you're completely off your rocker. So it's actually that ingrained in us that these viruses exist. And that's how important it is that we be honest with ourselves and we look at everything with objective eyes and we say, okay, you're trying to give me medication or a vaccine or this or that. Well, prove to me that you even have isolated a virus, that you even know what a virus is, that this virus actually exists as you present it. So there are people out there, not as many as the Flat Earth movement or the fake space realization. You know, there's a book by Klaus Conlon, and it's titled, How the Medical Industry Continually Invents Epidemics, Making Billion-Dollar Profits at Our Expense. And he shows that the alleged contagious viruses are just, in fact, particles produced by the cells themselves as a consequence of certain stress factors. So there's a lot of information out there. We need to discover a lot more information. And like I said, this is not a very popular topic, and there's not many people out there blowing the whistle on it. But I think that there are enough questions to be asked in this regard. Are viruses in fact real, or do they not exist? Can we not prove that they exist? Just like we can't prove certain things in space, I'm not sure we can prove many things in microspace that have been sold to us over the years.
While smallpox may be the most deadly virus of the 20th century, there are other microscopic killers that hold impressive numbers of victims. In the war against viruses, man is trying to build up an efficient arsenal of defense. A race against time has truly begun. Each mutation is like a new secret weapon against which we must learn to defend ourselves. For more than a century, modern virology has been taking giant steps forward in vaccine research.
What they sell us, or what they sold the world as being viral particles, are not viral particles. And you're just going to borrow you the latest issue of Scientific American, and there you will find on page 50 the explanation what they are showing to us. Cellular particles for export, import of proteins and other materials produced by certain cells. And they look exactly the same what they're showing us as HIV. So this is one explanation for what we see in those electron micrographs. And on a molecular level, they detect HIV only by indirect means. They say, if you are positive, it means if you have antibody against some proteins, you are positive. But it's a clear circular argument because they have no viral proteins. They just come up using proteins which in the mixture of those cells and those cells were prepared under severe conditions, isolating the proteins without showing this gel, using those proteins in the AIDS test, in the HIV antibody test, wrongly claiming those are HIV-specific proteins. And if you bind against those proteins, you said you are HIV positive. But this is a circular argument because they produced, under very stressful conditions, those proteins. And imagine if your body, under very stressful conditions, produces the same proteins, your body reacts in building antibodies against those proteins, thus resulting in positivity. And of course, if you think about the hemophiliacs, which were since 1969 were given prophylactically factor VIII preparation, which was forbidden before because they were afraid of antibody production against those factor preparations because they're very impure. Only 0.3% is pure activity. The rest is cellular debris, proteins, foreign proteins. There are all the liver diseases coming from in the case of hemophiliacs. And of course, this results in positivity. They have huge amounts of foreign proteins introduced to their body. The body makes antibodies against, and then they come up with a positive HIV test.
But to protect humans efficiently, stocks of defensive weapons must be manufactured in sufficient quantities. The industrial war machine for vaccine production must be launched to put a stop to the invisible invaders. The vaccine must then be distributed to the four corners of the globe. Unlike vaccines, viruses travel alone. Vaccines reinforce our body's defense.
I want to just say something about vaccines now.
The question about vaccines, look, if there is no virus, and if they can only detect by indirect means the presence of some proteins said to be specific for HIV, but expressed only under severe stress conditions, then to vaccinate, it means to make the thing worse. And of course, if there is no demonstration of the existence of such virus, it makes absolutely no sense to vaccinate.
The background of AIDS, and we are absolutely sure about this, is the antibiotic resistance catastrophe, killing people in hospitals like flies, because there are no antibiotics available without resistance in some bacteria. So in a state of immune suppression in the hospital, a lot of people come down with bacterial infections. This is called sepsis because of blood poisoning. When too much bacteria are growing and producing toxins, this is going to kill them in a state of reduced immunity. And we had these problems already in the beginning of the 70s. There have been kind of emergency conferences dealing with the problem because they were scared that resistance would spread and they have no antibiotica available. So they invented a very strong antibioticum, and it's not an antibioticum to say it's pure chemotherapy. It's a double folic acid antagonist. The good old sulfonamide and two of them put together would kill every microbe. But the problem is they were scared that in the gay scene, new resistance would develop and spread into the population. It was in June 81 when the first publication came out, published by the Centers of Disease Control, saying 5 men had PCP and 2 of them died, even being treated with Septrim, this last or the strongest antibioticum available. The AIDS definition was there before, saying if you have PCP and if you have KS, caused by nitrites as well, because the nitrites are transformed into NO only in the smallest vessels, because the partial pressure of oxygen is high enough to perform this transformation, and NO is a very potent growth stimulant. So we have this neoplasia and hyperplasia in the endothelia, and this condition it's called Kaposi sarcoma. AIDS started partly when they said that it's possible to measure the strength of the immune system, analyzing or counting T4 cells, the so to say helper cells. But that's not possible, and it has already been published in '81 in the journal JAMA, Journal of the American Medical Association, saying that it makes no sense to count subsets even of lymphocytes, because there was never a correlation. It could be high or low, and people are healthy or ill, it doesn't matter. So this was already known. But the problem was at this time already that in medicine people would not look to the facts, but what is possible to sell on the market, because it was the year 1977 when it became possible to patent medical techniques. So they wouldn't care if there's any clinical meaning behind those measurements, but they just sold it on the market. And the model of immunology would say at this time, if the immune system is weak, so cancer would appear. And that has been fundamentally mistaken, and it was wrong when they said it in '81. They knew it already in 1980 that this has been wrong. The immune surveillance theory of cancer came into existence when the war against cancer failed. They were working with the test, with cells in the test tube, and say, look, we have a high activity of reverse transcription, therefore a virus must be inside, and the virus is the cause of cancer. But the nature of cancer is much different, and when they found reverse transcription everywhere, they gave up the idea that retroviruses would cause cancer, and they were not speaking about it anymore, but wasted billions of dollars into this and developed chemotherapy based on this idea that the multiplication of genetic material, and they were thinking of the viruses, should be blocked. So they developed molecules which were incorporated in a growing chain of newly to build up genetic material, and which would kill the build-up or prevent the build-up of this genetic molecule, and the cell eventually has to die. The idea of retroviruses in cancer is long over, but the chemotherapy still is there because it's sold, and they have no idea why, no rational explanation why they are using chemotherapy. We know what is reverse transcription. That's the repair of mechanism of the ends of the chromosomes. Yeah? And therefore we have high activity in cancer cells or Montagnier embryonic cells. But Montagnier never said that he found the virus of AIDS. He said this could be probably an effect and to be carefully studied. When he came up with his first test, he tested 30% of the American blood donators, so let's say the general population, he tested them positive. And the industry said, no, go home, Gallo. We won't buy your test because this is going to destroy our business. And the only thing what he did, he lowered the sensitivity of the antibody test. And that you can read in your library. You shouldn't believe me a single word. That's about science. Check it. I'm not speaking about thesis, opinions, or things, foggy things. No, everything is there, and we reach the bottom line. There's no way out. They designed a test to select gay people. And when, of course, he's stimulating the cell with all kind of mitogens, carcinogens, and he, of course, added hydrocortisone, which he hasn't published. But this matters. They added hydrocortisone like people under persistent stress, hypercortisolism, that the same proteins are produced. To say that all of you have to die, how unfair, how unjust, how cruel. They went too far, declaring an absolute death sentence in AIDS. From the first 5 cases, only 2 died, the 3 survived. So that's very clear that they built it up a system of belief because they were misusing the gay scene of New York City from 78 till 80 in order to isolate the hepatitis B vaccine out of them. So they perfectly knew already what kind of proteins and what kind of antiproteins, the antibodies, they have inside their blood and inside their body. So it was very easy for the ones who set up antibody tests to produce similar proteins like the body would produce under persistent stress. And that has been done. Think about Septrim, you know. The FDA says this should be given only 14 days maximum. Otherwise, your own blood picture is going to be destroyed irreversibly, means for the rest of the life, because the damages became inherited. Because it's Septrim, it's pure chemotherapy, it acts on a genetic level. This is why those kind of antibiotica are so effective, because they are destroying the genetic material of the bacteria, the damages are accumulating, and there is no repair. But the damages are accumulating inside our cells as well, and therefore this is the reason why AIDS, it's of greatest importance to everybody, but out of completely different reason. Because humankind is in danger to destroy its own genetic material using this kind of antibiotica and chemotherapy, which would destroy the genetic material of our mitochondria. This is the name of those bacteria inside our cell producing the energy. And then we go lower and lower with energy production, and this is what we are seeing. And if we then have no regenerative power, then it becomes a big problem. Drug abusers, who some of them live under persistent stress, or they get dirty street drugs, and which immediately would damage the liver or destroy the liver, so they have hepatitis as well, the drug abusers. We don't need viruses to explain hepatitis, inflammation. You know, alcohol, poisons, and wrong malnutrition, you know, everything is causing the liver to suffer. When people have a history of hepatitis, most likely they are positive in the HIV antibody test, or put it other way around. I never found a person testing positive who had no problems with its liver. Because the liver has a lot of regenerative power, means a lot of decay of cells when being absolute intoxicated, but that means a lot of cells inside your body. And if immune functions are suppressed, then antibodies are produced against your own proteins. All of them had hepatitis. That means the inflammation of the liver. And they have such a lot of problems because it was a big business selling clotting factors every day. But this destroyed the hemophiliacs. This caused harm to them to great extent. And when AIDS came up, it was an ideal thing to wash their hands and blame it on a new virus which has been transmitted. What they have overseen, and that's a real catastrophe for all chronic disease, where the energy is produced inside our cells. These bacteria are so stable, integrated inside the cell, that a great deal of their own genetic material has been exported inside the nucleus, where there is protection of the genetic material, better than in the bacteria themselves, but they have their own genetic material. That has been overseen. And now think about the antibiotics killing bacteria. They are killing our own energy plants inside the cell. And if the cell is not able to produce enough energy, it might die. So you go into persistent inflammatory conditions if the body has enough regeneration power to build up new cells, or the cell becomes cancerous using fermentation as its source of energy. And in the liver cells, we have most of the mitochondria present, 500 per cell. So that's the highest concentration of mitochondria. Of course, in egg cells of the women, we have 500,000. And therefore, AIDS is of greatest importance for women due to completely different reason, because with every shot, with unnecessary shot of antibiotica, they would destroy their genetic material, which they would pass over to the offspring. Because the mitochondria are only given to the next generation through the egg cell. has been known already in the mid-70s by Anthony Fauci, by the way. They knew when stress hormones are released, the immune functions are immediately suppressed. Because when we are under stress and we have to run away because the lion is behind us, we need no immune functions and waste energy for the replication of immune cells. But the dangerous thing is when we have persistent stress, heavy stress, not like outside the streets, but heavy stress, right? Be it nutritional, be it toxic, be it traumatic, psychological or infectious stress. If this stress is persistent, your body produces a lot of stress hormones, adrenaline, noradrenaline, and they would activate, they stimulate growth. But this is very dangerous, when this persists. So the body wisely makes a reaction against these activation processes, and that's cortisol. And cortisol suppresses every replication of proteins and therefore as well the replication of cells. So if you are in a state of persistent stress, you are in the same time in a state of persistent hypercortisolism, a huge amount of cortisolism, and then you become thinner and thinner, and your regeneration won't work, and you become more and more positive, means more and more antibodies. But the most important immune functions are not to take care about foreign or not foreign invaders. This is to recycle your own body. 1% of your body mass, and this is an incredible high number, 10 high to the 12 cells, have to be recycled every day. And if this is not possible anymore, then you are in a very bad condition, because your body's own proteins are going to endanger your own life, because they are poisonous if they are freely floating around inside your body, and fungal infections may grow on them. Gallo lost the rights to the test. This was published in Newsweek in '94, and American government let him fall like a hot potato. And already the industry built up a new man. This was David Ho here from New York, and he came up with a completely new model of the virus, saying now we have not a slow virus, but we have a virus à grande vitesse, at high speed. And he was using Karamal's PCR technique, which is a multiplication technique, not a quantification technique, by the way, and multiplying molecules into its millions and equal those molecules with the virus, right? Absolutely ridiculous. Even more, as those sequences he's going to multiply and equal them with the virus, that's the viral load, are present in everybody. It's just a way to save face for the whole AIDS industry, because more and more people are aware that this could not be, because inside the AIDS scene there are a lot of critical medical doctors, but they saw such a lot of contradiction, and it was discussed on conferences. So there was high noon for a new medal and a new test where the pharmaceutical companies could make a great business out of it, They say, the protein of the virus, the first protein is very long, and it has to be cut down exactly into its pieces, that the new virus is able to be built out of the shorter pieces. And now it starts to get funny. We have 8 different kinds of cutting sites where the protease, the enzyme which is cutting down the proteins, should exactly cut the precursor molecule into its shorter molecules. 8 different sites. Because when they invented the HIV sequence, saying that's the genetic material of HIV, they couldn't think about such details at this time, and now they have the problem to explain it. And they explained it in a way saying, the protease of HIV is unspecific. But how should this work when the protease is unspecific? How then a virus could come into existence when you have 8 different sites, and it needs to be cut exactly at those sites to build up the functional virus particle? And if you have 8 sites and the protease is not specific, you mustn't be a mathematician to say that's absolutely impossible that only a single virus could come into existence. And even worse, now they say the protease of HIV, that's unspecific. But our protease inhibitors, they are specific. So So you interfere on a very basic level of life. And it takes a time that you see the clinical outcome of these damages. And it's worse than AZT. AZT acts quicker on the genetic level, and but we have the possibility that the bacteria inside our intestines are eating up all this AZT. If you have a good digestion, you know, then that's no problem. But the protease inhibitors cannot be cut down because they are artificial. Then they would accumulate over the time inside your body, producing crystallines, destroying the kidney in the first line and other organs. But then, when they accumulate, and would cause all virus kind of effects. And this we have predicted some 2.5 years before already in the British journal Continuum. We have warned about not the side effects, but the main effects, you know. And the worst to come, it's the failure of the liver, and of course the blood production. When blood is destroyed, and that's what they say, it's the side effects, or, you know, when the fatty acid metabolism is destroyed as well, and you have fatty acid accumulation everywhere inside